Hello and welcome to Critical Readings, episode 337 for the 24th of August, 2026. I'm Dr. Sean Philip Cooper, and with me today I have Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
Salutations.
And Lane Haygood.
Hello, as always.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Well, we are on the penultimate week of our summer playthrough, and if you've been outside at all, you'll notice that the sun is getting a little bit more golden in its tinge, and it's setting a little bit sooner, and that means we're also coming to the end of summer. So we're going to say a fond farewell over the next couple weeks to this book, which has been, I think, very interesting to our readers. The comments have been very positive. People have enjoyed reading it, even when they've taken issue with White's politics or characterization of the past. And we're going to move on in the next weeks, the weeks ahead, to our first Reader's Choice selection. So what we've decided to do is, as a benefit to those who support critical readings and in response to reader requests over the years, we've decided to have it this Reader Choice series of podcasts, both before and after our summer series going forward, in which reader suggestions for topics we'll cover on the podcast are put to a vote of those in our Discord channel, and the winning text is what we'll read. And so we put a few of those reader choices to our Discord members over the past couple weeks, and the winner was Beowulf. So we're going to turn to that in a 3-part series of roughly 1,000 lines each, starting in 2 weeks' time. And that's very convenient, that 1,000-line break, because not only does it divide the work into 3 manageable components, but it also helps us to look at the work in its 3 major chapters, which are the fight against Grendel, the fight against Grendel's mother, and the fight against the dragon, which each basically are the 3 battles that Beowulf must contend with. So please look forward to that.
We'll be doing it in the translation that begins bro, right?
You might very well think that, but I couldn't possibly comment, except to say no. No, we are not going to read that one. Whose begins with bro? Is that Emily
Headley's?
Yeah, okay, yeah. We are going to be reading Seamus Heaney's for a couple different reasons. First, it's a very good translation. Although poetically, at times, it's more Heaney's poetry than the Beowulf poets. But this is a feature of translation. It's very difficult when translating to maintain the poetic form of the original. It's tough.
It's not just very difficult, it's generally impossible.
Impossible, yeah. As Cleance Brooks would tell us in The Heresy of Paraphrase and The Well-Wrought Urn. So we're going to read that version, and it has some other advantages as well. First, it has a facing page original text. So on the right side, you've got Heaney's English, and on the left side, you've got the Anglo-Saxon original, or a version of the Anglo-Saxon original. So that's very useful if you want to look back and forth, and it allows us to point out, or at least allows me to point out things in the Anglo-Saxon that might be of interest to us when we look at what Heaney does with them. And it also will give us some consistency, because we're going to be referring to line numbers, and we therefore need to be using some sort of consistent version. You're welcome, listeners, to use any version you like. You can grab a good old Father Kleber's Beowulf and use that. I've used it a lot myself, which doesn't even have a translation, but it does have a variorum at the bottom. So feel free to use that if you wish, but we will be using Heaney's. And it's also very easy to acquire. It's been out for 30 years now. I want to say 30, was it 2002, 1998? Anyway, something. It's been out for a while, and it's readily available in paperback and hardback, and it's still in print, so it's a great version to use. All right, well, we have one more piece of news, and I'm really pleased to announce this. It's what a coup for us. If she but knew how much we wanted to have her here. So our dear friend and guest host, Madeline Potter, if you are a member of our Discord chat or you're following us on Twitter, you'll know this already, but she will be joining us as a recurring panelist in just a few weeks' time, and then we hope that she'll be moving up to co-host status soon after that, once things get settled in. So she'll be joining us on the regular, and she'll be here for Beowulf, and I know that she's a fan favorite, and we're delighted to welcome her here to join us in what will soon be our group of 4 here on the podcast. All right, with that said, it's time to turn to chapters 6 through 10 of the... Oh, wait. Reader comments. See, I was forgetting something. We do have reader comments this week, and we'll have them again in 2 weeks' time when we come up to Beowulf. But first, let's talk about what our readers had to say about episode 335, which was 2 weeks ago. And that was covering the very end of the Ill-Made Knight. Lindsay wrote, "Thank you for choosing The Once and Future King. As a child, my favorite Disney movie was The Sword and the Stone, so I'm surprised I've never read the book, and I'm delighted to finally be doing so. I don't have a question as much as a quote-stroke-comment. Over the course of this series, the hosts have mulled over White's possible simplification of government and the use of violence to solve problems. It brought to mind one of my favorite quotes by George R.R. Martin. Martin says he adores Tolkien, but always had some questions and quibbles about Middle-earth. Here's the quote. Tolkien can say that Aragorn became king and reigned for 100 years, and he was wise and good. But Tolkien doesn't ask the question, what was Aragorn's tax policy? Did he maintain a standing army? What did he do in times of flood and famine? And what about all these orcs? By the end of the war, Sauron is gone, but all of the orcs aren't gone. They're in the mountains. Did Aragorn pursue a policy of systematic genocide and kill them, even the little baby orcs in their little orc cradles?" End quote. It made me laugh and makes me wonder about what George Mason would have to say about White's take on King Arthur. Thank you for the podcast. I love listening and challenging myself to read along. Well, Lindsay, I've seen this quote come up a few times, both from detractors of Tolkien who say he really should engage with these particular bits of minutia, and also from defenders of Tolkien, like me, who say that these are totally ancillary to what Tolkien is trying to do, since he's not writing a history book as such. He's writing a mythology, which may look like history at times, but is not history. So what do we think, gentlemen? Is this a shortcoming of Tolkien? Is it a shortcoming of White?
No, I'm with you in this falls into mythology, not history. I think it would cheapen and take away of something of Tolkien. On White, on the other hand, I'm not sure White has that coherent vision that Tolkien had about creating a myth for modern English. He does have political points. He does have things that are supposed to get down into the minutia of things, and sometimes glosses over and sometimes doesn't. He's gotten better as we've gone on, though. I will say the political points of the end of The Candle in the Wind are very different than The Sword and the Stone.
My take is more complicated than that. I think that both Tolkien and White have a similar problem in that they're using the form of the realistic novel that comes out of the 19th century, and they're trying to do something related to romance or possibly mythography. And that's not an easy fit, because the realistic novel wants to treat the world like the real world. The fantasy world should be like the real world. It should have all the same things in it, the same social forces, the same pressures, the same trade-offs when choices are made. But then that gets in the way of writing a romance or a myth, which is a much more narrow kind of thing. So I think that the mismatch is a problem at times, because they want you to take it realistically, but then you have all these questions that if it was real, you would have. And they don't answer those questions. In fact, they can't answer them. Otherwise, they'd break what they're trying to do. So I think it's a problem. I also would say Tolkien's politics are not obvious. He's not didactic in the way that White is. In that way, I think he's a better storyteller than White. But there are political consequences for what he brings into focus and what he always elides. And also especially for his kind of racial determinism. All dwarves behave like this, elves behave like this, orcs behave like this, right? So if you tried to put that into the real world, the political consequences of that are quite ugly and bad. So, he's not making a political point, a didactic point, but what he's bringing into focus and what he's leaving out of focus, I think, is politically significant. With White, it's just so messy. His politics are something, as Lane suggests, he's working out along the way as he's writing. So he does develop in his perspective. But, he doesn't bring in enough information to actually give you a realistic picture. And he's also not clear about when we are or where we are. And those details matter when you're trying to make, political and economic assessments about what should be done. So, White is much messier in that way, and I find that to be troubling because he wants to present us with something like a realistic novel, but it just isn't a lot of times.
One thing I'll say about White, and this endears me to him, and it won't endear him to Drew, but it endears me to him. White reminds me of undergraduates I taught in my critical theory and survey courses who had a really good, broad, but not deep knowledge of the things they were discussing. And then you'd press them on a point. And then they'd say, well, I don't really know anything about that. I'm not really trying to do that anyway. So, and I'm like, oh, I see. Okay. And, I find that endearing, right? Everyone's a dilettante about something. And, students who are undergraduates are dilettantes too. And so are, I think, novelists who are trying to write secretly a political tract inside of their fantasy novel. They're dilettantes.
You're allowed to be a dilettante novelist as long as you don't also decide that you want to publish a political tract hidden inside the novel. So when he gets as didactic as he is, then he invites readers to criticize him on those grounds.
Well, I think he knows, though, and the way that I identify him as knowing is that when he is forced to deal with history, as he sometimes does, he did in, I think, last week's set of readings when he gives us all those historical vignettes about peasants being badly treated, and the church and the lords of the realm doing the bad treatment, some of it really spectacularly horrendous and violent. I think that, that's useful, right? It acknowledges that everything's not a rosy picture. But when he does that, what is he doing? Oh, well, the purely fictional Louis XI, the equally fabulous Henry II, right? The completely unbelievable existence of Richard III. Okay, so yes. So I think he does that in order to bracket his history because the history itself, he knows, isn't firmly grounded enough. So these are but vignettes, and they can only ever be vignettes. They can't really be the basis of a coherent historical representation of the past. And I think he retreats back to that whenever he recognizes in himself that actually, I just don't know enough about this to make a coherent case for these political beliefs on historical grounds. So the fact
I think vignettes is the right way to think about his approach. I think the whole Once and Future King is vignettes. It doesn't hold together, to my mind, as a proper novel. It only works as, we have a visitor.
I do.
It only works as
go out.
a string, as a string of vignettes. That if you like that sort of thing, then you'll probably like it. And if you find that frustrating, then you probably won't like this. Another thing about the comment, though, if you are a fan of the Disney film The Sword and the Stone, I don't think it'll be obvious that you like White's Sword and the Stone because they're very different in significant ways. I think that this only works as a great piece of literature, a critical reading for an English and Anglophilic audience. I don't think it would work in any other culture, translated into another language, even within other English-speaking contexts where you're not as Anglophilic. Scottish readers are bound to find this terribly insulting and belittling. The same goes for the Irish. I mean, it's just.
I'm sure the Indians would
it's
enjoy
a very English.
Should be translated into
it's got
Hindi.
English blinders on.
Translated into Hindi. They'll love it.
I'm not convinced.
It is a pro forma piece that really works to the advantage of English imperialism, but not historical English imperialism, rather some sort of constructed mythological. It's the English imperialism of all those 19th century pictures of Queen Victoria holding the globe and Benjamin Disraeli offering her the empire in the form of maps. It's a cartoon, really.
Yes, and English imperialism has always depended on Arthur mythology. I mean, the English Empire really begins under the Tudors, and they are Arthurians. They trace their lineage, a fake genealogy, back to Arthur. So this mythology has been part of the empire from the get-go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that comment, Lindsay. That's very helpful to us as we look to the end of this work. Philip has written in. He writes, a short and sweet comment this week to say that I've been keeping up with episodes and appreciate the insightful conversations as ever, eager to get into the last book and see how the kingdom comes crumbling down. A couple of non-academic, entertaining thoughts. I agree with Dr. Keene on both points. A, cast an ugly Lancelot. And B, babies are quite weird-looking little creatures, though certainly better than a baby that looks like a biblically accurate angel. He also writes, on the casting of Lancelot on screen, I have a curious connection, which I hope you'll indulge. Santiago Cabrera, the handsome hirsute Lancelot, gracing the cover of episode 333, and he was the Lancelot in the BBC's Merlin series, was also cast as Aramis in the BBC series The Musketeers. While I haven't seen Merlin, it's odd that in that and The Musketeers, he portrays a noble soldier of God, trusted by the king, who nonetheless has an adulterous and treasonous relationship with the queen, one which the king is vaguely aware of. Aramis and Lancelot are both devoted to their queen, concerned for the king to discover their relationship, though in The Musketeers it's far less physical. While it doesn't implode the kingdom like in White, we do get an intense moment in which Aramis is eventually confronted by King Louis in a church to the tune of, admit you slept with the queen, I slept with the loneliest woman in Paris. This doesn't have any real implications, but I thought it uncanny that Cabrera would play the two characters. Now, I haven't seen The Musketeers, so I was surprised to read of this. Have either of you seen it?
No.
I have.
Well, that's a disappointing way of expressing it.
I love The Three Musketeers. It's one of my favorite novels of all time, and so every adaptation I've ever seen of it has been disappointing to me.
Oh yeah, that'll do it.
That's because I am who I am, and I just can't. I cannot love adaptations of novels that I love.
Who can, right? You will, if you love something in a particular way, and you love all of those particular ways, then when those things are changed, you're going to be upset, because it's like asking people to change, I don't know, bits of your wife or something, right? You wouldn't want to do that, like lop bits off or change things around.
It really doesn't. It doesn't bother me in the way that it does, I think, the two of you. For me, it's like listening to a different soloist play the same concerto. You know, I like some performances a lot. I dislike other performances, but I also like that there's a variety of ways of interpreting that particular piece of music, and I find it delightful to compare and contrast what different artists did with it.
My neighbor,
So it doesn't upset me.
My neighbor who comes over and asks me about literature all the time, came over this week to ask me about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. And, you know, what do you think of it? He hadn't seen it yet. Is it good? Is it bad? I haven't seen it yet. I'm not going to see it. It's not really something that interests me. I know that'll be a terrible shock to many people. I don't really. There are many people in classical literature and in like canonical literature who just love the Odyssey with a passion that is unbridled. I'm not one of them. I've never been. Sorry, but I tried to give him, like, you know, what I gathered from reading lots and lots and lots of reviews of it, which do interest me because I'm interested in criticism. I said, you know, it's strange. It's one of those works where people's opinion of it doesn't really break down along party lines, or, you know, woke versus non-woke, or right versus left, or, you know, even classical literature versus non-classical literature enthusiasts. But there nevertheless there do seem to be two camps about it. It's a very divisive movie. There are people who really like it because they like what it does as an adaptation, and they tend to be people who like Nolan's films. And then there are people who don't like it because of what it does as an adaptation, and they tend to be people who don't like Nolan's other films. I said, so that seems to be the divide. If you're a Nolan fan, you probably like the film. And if you don't like Nolan's other films, you won't like this either. But both sides do agree on one thing. It's the dialogue is spectacularly badly written. And I said, and that's the real thing that keeps me from going to see it, because it's the kind of thing that would make me get up and walk out, right? That's like the cardinal sin of filmmaking, is if the dialogue is bad, I'll leave. I can suffer through bad special effects and anything else and bad filmography, but I can't suffer through bad dialogue.
The dialogue is atrocious, and it's Nolan's own. I mean, he wrote the script. I think you identified the right dividing line. The Nolanites think that it's brilliant, but they think everything that Nolan creates is brilliant. And then normal people with objective judgment think that it's not a very good film.
Thank you for that thoroughly unbiased framing, Dr. Keene. Well, the point of this I was getting to is that I said, look, it's hard for me because whenever an Arthurian film gets made, I always measure it against Mallory. I'm a Mallorean. I've written articles on Mallory, written books about Mallory. So I want everything to be Mallory. And I suppose that if you've been listening to the past few episodes on T.H. White, you'll have noticed that I have on occasion mentioned Mallory, right? Because I'm still, even though I love White, I really love this book, I'm always measuring it up against Mallory. And in a way that's odd, because I read Mallory seriously after I read The Once and Future King. And I should point out that when I read Mallory, I tend to do the other thing. I'm looking at White and thinking about White. So they're always there, the two of them kind of facing each other in my mind.
That is an anomaly, by the way, because it's clearly written assuming the reader knows Mallory already.
Exactly. I think I'd read The Boys King Arthur, which is like a really redacted, cut down version of Mallory. And then I read this, and I didn't even think about Mallory when I was reading it. I just read it. And he mentions Mallory repeatedly. I'm like, oh, yeah, I've read that, but it never really entered into my mind. And then, of course, when I went to college, I read Mallory over and over and over and over again. And so when I was doing that, I was always thinking of White. So the two of them, I use them kind of critique one against the other. But I would be very upset if someone made a version of The Once and Future King, like Lerner and Loewe did, or like Disney did, and changed it, which is why I don't like Disney's The Sword and the Stone, and I don't like Camelot. Don't change it.
Yes, Lerner and Loewe went through great trouble to get the legal right to adapt The Once and Future King, and then promptly ignored most of it.
Yeah, they used this much of it, and they changed about 90% of that. So, well, there you go. It's probably the kind of thing that is unfilmable as written, because it's didactic, and it spends a lot of time in the minds of the characters, and then it spends lots and lots of time giving us potted histories. We have a couple this week, right, where we have those I call them White's inventories or lists, right? But he gets on this thing where he gives you, they're smaller than vignettes. They're thumbprint pictures, right? And he just gives us one after another, after another, after another. And the goal is to present them all together in such an overwhelming way that they create a picture of what it is he's trying to portray without him having to explain it. That's an interesting way of doing things, but it's unfilmable. I mean, what would that look like? It's a collage, really. It's a verbal collage. And you can't do that to your viewers in a cinema. They won't stand for it.
Yeah, it would work as, a radio adaptation. You could do really nice audio stuff with it, but in a primarily visual medium where you need to show things rather than just talk, it doesn't work.
I think if White had been a college professor, his classes would have been fascinating. And he probably would have debated you pretty reasonably, although you get the idea from his Merlin and his Arthur that occasionally he'd become irascible and say, enough! As Merlin does. He loses his temper. It's enough. Enough questions. Just accept it at some point. All right. Well, we have a couple comments. One quite brief, one a little bit longer on last week's episode, which is the very beginning of The Candle in the Wind. Disa wrote, briefly, I find this more and more interesting as we go along and loving listening to all your thoughts on it. I'm not sure why, but I expected more straightforward fantasy and a whole lot less exploration of humanity. I'm not complaining. Well, I think that's what saves it, right? For all of White's insufficiencies, the thing that makes the work really interesting is his exploration of humanity and his attempt, even if it's not completely successful, to draw larger scale lessons. It's the Shakespearean impulse in him, really.
I wouldn't classify this as fantasy at all.
Well,
Does it sometimes get classified that way?
Why, I think it is. Yeah, I think it, but it's fantasy the way that Arthurian literature is fantasy, which is not fantasy. That's just the modern sort of collapsed, because everything has become kind of collapsed. We don't really have a word. You can't go to your bookstore and find the romance section. And if you did, well, you can, but it won't have the Once and Future King in it, right? It'll have books of a very different sort in it. There'll be strapping young men on the cover with their shirts off. So,
like Lancelot at the beginning of chapter 6.
Exactly. So I think that's the thing. It's a romance. And a romance, not a romance novel. It's a romance. And we don't really have that as a category anymore. But that's what it is. I struggle to think of what the last romance ever written was. Probably something in the 19th century that nobody remembers. But have there been romances since?
Nathaniel Hawthorne called his long prose works romances, not novels, even though novel was a category available to him. I don't know of writers doing it after that. I'm sure there are some.
Thinking of Goethe and the Sorrows of Young Werther and Meister Wilhelm's Apprenticeship. I mean, these are romances too, but they're romances that fit into our understanding of the novel. But the Once and Future King is really, like, you really struggle to pin down what it is, right? It's not a fantasy work, although it has elements that are there's magic, there's a questing beast, right? There's fairies. So it's fantasy in the way that, it's fantasy in the way that Susanna Clark's works are fantasy, if that makes sense. It's fantasy like, the Mr. Norrell novel is fantasy. Maybe even less so, but they're similar.
It's not genre fantasy in the post Tolkien mold.
No, it's something.
No, it's not. It's not secondary world, and I think that the fantastic elements actually get less as the novels go on. I mean, in the first novel, we have at least the suggestion that maybe the transformations are actually happening, that Merlin is certainly living backwards in time. There are those contra-realistic elements there, but by The Candle in the Wind, that's pretty much almost all gone.
Yeah,
and that's interesting.
And the things that are magical are almost always treated somewhat tongue in cheek. So it's never like straightforward. This is just the way this world is.
Yeah, and I think the effect is to make you doubt the magicalness of it at all. And I think it's interesting, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, that the magic kind of goes out of Camelot as we get closer and closer to the denouement. Well, one more comment, and this is from Mao. He says, when it comes to the topic of Mordred's motivations, I quite like the interpretation in Pendragon, something I brought up years ago during the Lamort read in the comments. I do remember that, Mao. To refresh your memory, Pendragon is a tabletop RPG where players play during the grand scope of King Arthur's reign and does include the fall of the court and Arthur's death. Critical to the game is the mechanic of passions. Players and NPCs can have passions that they then invoke to modify their roles and stats during gameplay. The best example would be Lancelot, whose passion, that is love score for Guinevere, is so high he is virtually invulnerable in 1v1 combat, since he can invoke it to fight for her favor. However, You can also have a passion for hatred targeted at a specific person or people. Mordred is, to my knowledge, the only character in the game with hatred passion targeting Mordred. He hates himself. This puts an interesting interpretation on the self-destructive actions Mordred takes. He is acerbic and biting against all the rot of King Arthur's court, and he correctly identifies some of the pitfalls of it, fie on goodness, but it seems this is all motivated by his own self-hatred that he cannot resolve, so he directs it outward to everyone and everything around him. I think this would actually tie in nicely with White's interpretation, since I don't remember in White if we ever get a good explanation of why Mordred is like this. White seems to just see him as a 1930s demagogue and leaves it to the prose and drama to carry it, which I do think is well done. But if you look at it from the angle Mordred is using, whatever he can to direct his self-hatred outwards, it makes good sense to me, I think. Good health to the panel, and I look forward to the next reading. Well, thank you for that, Mao. I think that's very interesting, and White would probably buy into that to some degree. There's a certain Freudian element to this subsumed self-hatred that motivates everything else. We'll be talking about Mordred's motivation a good deal next week, since it will begin next week's reading. But I
would say we
ahead.
get at least 3 explanations for why Mordred is the way that he is. One is that he's from Orkney, so he has that Gaelic problem, and White's very insistent on this throughout the entire work. There's this miasma of just a sort of semi-rationality that these people have as a sort of genetic inheritance. So that's one reason. The other is that he's the result of illicit liaison, and so White acts as if that's had consequences for Mordred. At the very least, it's had consequences for how his parents treat him, or the circumstances in which he was raised. But sometimes White makes it sound like there's some kind of transmitted something bad because of that. And then the third is that he's raised alone by his mother Morgause, in sort of isolation.
That last point is particularly important. And in chapter 11, as we'll discuss next week, this is, I think, the primary... That's the chapter in which we see Mordred at his most malevolent. And White also gives us his explanation of Mordred's motivation in a sort of potted psychological little tract that he gives us inside of the chapter. So stay tuned for that. All right, but as to this week, since we do actually have to read several chapters and we've eaten up about half an hour of the podcast, let's get to that. And thank you all for your comments. We'll read them again in 2 weeks' time. Our concluding thoughts will precede our discussion of Beowulf. Oh, and I should point out, there will be a week. I always forget to this. There will be a week's break in 2 weeks' time. So actually 3 weeks' time. Well, we'll be taking a week off, but stay tuned. All right. Well, chapter 6. The plot is going to be revealed. We know what it is because Mordred and Agravain have already come up with it. In chapter 4, chapter 5, they go to the king. Mordred very gleeful when he realizes that Arthur is going to involve himself, even passively. And you can hear Arthur talking out loud in those earlier chapters when he's saying, I suppose it would be inappropriate for me to deliberately foil your plan, but it would also be inappropriate for me to stay behind if I was going to leave, so I guess I have to leave. So he's proceeding very logically and rationally. I think it's interesting. It seems to suggest that Arthur believes logic, reason, can save him and the realm in the face of irrational hatred, rancor, animosity, and bitterness, and indeed physical violence. And what White, I think, shows us, and I think he's right about this, and he doesn't do this didactically, it just comes out of the story, is that actually doesn't work. Unfortunately, meek reason is not enough to save the realm from the threats of a malevolent and irrational actor, as in the case of Mordred, especially if Mordred decides to use the system against itself. He knows his father well. He knows what kind of a man his father is. And the plan he comes up with is one that plays directly on the expectation that his father will do everything he wants him to do. He won't stand in his way because he knows his father will follow the law to the letter. And the law is useful in that regard because it gives you a blueprint for what someone will do. Right? If you know someone is going to act according to the law and you have access to the law, then you know what someone is going to do. Right? I mean, and that's what Mordred does. He knows exactly what Arthur is going to do. So he and Agravain come up with a plan, and the plan is very simple. They're going to convince Arthur to go away on a hunting trip, which he was planning to go on. And Lancelot will therefore want to stay behind so he can have a liaison with the queen. And because Mordred and Agravain know exactly what Lancelot will do, and they know exactly what Arthur will do, they plan to catch him in flagrante delicto. And that is precisely what Gareth and Gaheris hear as well. Gaheris doesn't want to be involved, doesn't want to betray his family, but he doesn't want to be involved. This will be important in the chapters ahead. Gawain doesn't want any part of it at all. He walks out of the room. And Gareth is mortified because Lancelot is like a father to him. And he's the man who knighted Gareth. And so Gareth...
And remember, he's the fair hands.
That's right, Beaumain.
Lancelot was the only one who treated him as if he mattered before they found out who he was.
Indeed, because Lancelot, of course, could see that he would be a brilliant knight. And, of course, so it transpires. Gareth is a good knight in many ways. He doesn't want to betray his family, but he's also not going to let this stand. So he goes to Lancelot, and that is where we find him in chapter 6. And White adds a detail here that I think is quite interesting. It's a very short chapter. It's only about 4 pages long. Here it is. Lancelot is about to leave. He's pretty much stepping out the door. And he's got that kettle hat still. And he looks in it like he did when he was a boy, looking at his reflection. And he's marching around the room, waiting for the summons from the queen. He's got his big sword. Right? His huge sword, which stood against the wall, its straps hanging from it. And Lancelot is ready to go. And then Gareth comes charging in and starts telling him about the plan that Mordred and Agravain have plotted. And Lancelot's response to this is to take it not very seriously, which we can understand. He's the best knight in the world. He doesn't really need to worry about Mordred and Agravain, because if they made these charges under the old laws, where they can't prove them, they'd have to fight him in 1v1 combat. And much like in the Pendragon board game, Lancelot would win. He's not going to be beaten by Agravain, even if he is sober. And he's certainly not going to be beaten by Mordred, who's quite weak. As we found when he was yelling at his brothers, they kind of put this on him. And he'll have another episode with them in due course.
Well, and the other reason is this has happened many times before. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't think there's any reason to expect a different outcome than any of the other times that they've had a chance to be alone together.
Many people have said he's not before, but nothing came of it. It will blow over. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Gareth says, no, this time it's no, this is different. And Lancelot won't listen. No, you don't understand. We've been dealing with this for decades. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine. And then Gareth actually puts it explicitly to him. And that causes Lancelot to pause. Gareth says, don't go see the queen tonight. Everyone always deals with this obliquely, right? Gareth is being very specific. And Lancelot lifted one of his eyebrows. He says, why?
Lifted his extraordinary
Extraordinary
eyebrows.
And he says, the king's gone away on purpose to trap you. And Lancelot says the king would never do that. Well, here's the problem, right? Gareth is not exactly describing what's happening. The king isn't going away for the purpose of trapping Lancelot. He's going away because he always intended to go away. But Arthur does know that whilst he is away, Mordred and Agravain will use his absence to try and trap Lancelot. So the imprecision of the truth here is a problem, and it leads Lancelot to discount this out of hand. And he says, this is a risk. And Lancelot says, if it's a risk, I'll enjoy it. And he starts pushing Gareth out the door. Go away. You have to leave. And he tells... Go ahead.
It's significant that this is the second warning that he's gotten in so many days. Arthur also, without being direct, but getting as close as Arthur's ever gotten, sat down with Guinevere and Lancelot and warned them.
And that was Arthur kind of refusing to make an exception of himself to the system of justice he's set up. Meanwhile, Gareth here is betraying the sort of blood loyalty of the Orkney clan. So we have Arthur being faithful to the system, Gareth abandoning the values that his family has, and neither one of them are enough to move Lancelot from his course of action.
Yes, and I think that you said that exactly the right way. Arthur won't betray the system that he himself set up. He's committed to this abstraction that he himself has designed over years. And that's what Mordred gets about him. He realizes that the abstract system that Arthur sets up is a trap for Arthur himself. And Mordred sees that better than anyone else does. There's another really interesting bit here in this chapter 6. Gareth reveals something about how White has set this book up, The Candle in the Wind. He said, it's Agravain and Mordred. They hate you. Or Agravain does. He is jealous. Mordred hates Arthur most. Mm-hmm. And those are the two foils that have been set up here in A Candle in the Wind. It's Mordred and Arthur as kind of inversions of each other, and Agravain and Lancelot as inversions of each other. And White's like really clear with the Agravain Lancelot inversion, down to like details. So it says that Agravain looks older than his years, whereas Lancelot looks younger than his years. Agravain is an alcoholic. Lancelot is a teetotaler. And so on and so forth. All these little details that are just like mirror images of each other. And then, in fact, it's the two of them in conflict that results in Agravain's death. It's Mordred and Arthur that results in Arthur's.
No, I think that's quite right. The last thing I'll say about this chapter is that when it begins, Lancelot is waiting for the knock from Guinevere, and Guinevere's servant probably. And when he hears it, he grabs his sword and goes to open the door because he's going to leave. While he's talking to Gareth, that knock actually comes. And he waits for a moment until it's suitably gone, and then he propels Gareth out. And then he throws his mantle over the shoulder and strides out. But he strides out without the sword that he had in his hand initially. And White makes a point of reminding us about this. It's quite important, right? It's to set up a threat. He stepped into the darkness of the passage, dismissing the subject from his mind, and disappeared. What he had forgotten was his sword. So Gareth actually endangers Lancelot by doing this. He doesn't help him. Lancelot is unwilling to listen. And what happens is because Gareth comes to visit him and warn him, Lancelot then forgets his sword. Now that's a detail that is not in Mallory. That is entirely unique to White. And it's quite nice, I think. It's a good detail because it It adds an element. Well, it's what the Anglo-Saxons would have called weird, right? As we'll talk about next in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when we're talking about Beowulf, or fate or destiny. Right? You can't actually avoid this happening, but by trying to avoid it, you can kind of force it to occur. And what's going to happen next, which is straight out of Malory, is that Lancelot is going to have to deal with the people who come to apprehend him, and he won't be armed. And the story he gives us in this chapter, which is this is such, it's so well put together. I'm really impressed by it. And so we should therefore, I suppose, what White wants us to feel is worry, right? Because he's forgotten his sword. That's why he ends the chapter with those very words. But inside this chapter, Lancelot tells Gareth a story, which he's also telling us because we're reading it, about a very important episode from Malory, which is that he was up a tree once without his armor and without his sword, and he was tricked. It was a trap to kill him, and he won anyway, right? So we don't actually need to be scared. White is kind of telling us, and he's doing what Lancelot is doing, which is Lancelot saying, look, all these things have happened in the past, and I've always had the solution to them. And he's now telling us this he doesn't realize it, of course. Lancelot doesn't, but we should. He's giving us the circumstances of what's about to happen. He's going to be trapped. He's going to be unarmed, but he's been there before and he knows what to do. He will get out of it, and he will. And so let's turn to that. Chapter 7.
White has we talked about vignettes. This is one of those really nice vignettes where he depicts the two of them as an aging couple, right? They're no longer young people in the heat of passion. Like, they have a long-term romance, and here he is plucking a white hair out of her head, right? This is one of those very realistic, quite touching scenes that show us how their relationship has changed over the years. It's not just greenhouse kind of plant. It's something that has survived a long time.
Nothing carnal happens in this chapter, right? They brush hair, they sing, they talk. And in what will be a parallel to next week when we talk about chapter 11, the talk turns to the situation in Camelot, and then inexorably it turns to Mordred. And Guinevere is instantly filled with fear. Dread, actually, not fear. But then the dread becomes fear. So dread, of course, is a much more nebulous thing, right? It's not focused on the present. Fear is focused on the present. So there's dread at first. She starts to think about what Mordred means and the danger that he poses to Camelot. And then that dread crystallizes into fear. And we see this happen, in my version, it's page 600. She's talking about Agravain, and she's thinking about Mordred, and then this is what she says. I think, well, actually, Lancelot reminds her of Lamorak and Tristram. That's how they get on this point. Tristram was murdered because he copied the idea, and it was the Gawain family who killed Sir Lamorak by treachery. And this reminds her of all the death that's been associated with the Orkney clan. I think, she said, that the reason why Agravain hates you is the old story of sour grapes. I don't think he cares a bit about the idea, but he naturally envies anybody who is a better fighter than himself. He loathed Tristram because of the thrashing he got from him on the way to Joyous Gard, and he helped to murder Lamorak because the boy had beaten him at the priory jousts. And how many times have you upset him? I don't remember. Lance, do you realize that the other two people he hated are dead? Everybody dies sooner or later. Now here's the crystallization of fear. Suddenly the queen had swept her plates out of his fingers. She had twisted round in the chair, and with one hand holding a pigtail, she was staring at him with round eyes. I believe it is true what Gareth said. I believe they are coming to catch us tonight. She jumped out of the chair and began pushing him to the door. Go away. Go while there is time. But Jenny, no, no buts. I know it is true. I can feel it. Here's your cloak. Oh, Lance, please go quickly. They stabbed Sir Lamorak in the back. Come, Jenny, don't get excited about nothing. It is only a fancy. It is not a fancy. Listen. Listen. I can't hear anything. Look at the door. The handle, which lifted the latch of the door, a piece of wrought iron shaped like a horseshoe, was moving softly to the left. It moved like a crab, uncertainly. And of course, you'll say, oh, God, now it's too late. So this will happen again. There's a wonderful parallelism here, right? Here the proximate fear is Agravain, and then the realization that Agravain and Mordred are working together. Everyone that Agravain is hated is dead. Lancelot is hated by Agravain, therefore he will try to kill Lancelot as well. And of course, that is what is about to happen. But what is also about to happen is something that Lancelot has foretold. He's going to get out of the trap the same way he did before. Now, in Mallory, we only get sort of, it's actually one of those areas where Mallory normally excels in the details of battle. He's really, really fine on those. In this sequence, he's not as detailed as White is. White gives us a really good detail of the struggle. They're yelling, screaming, traitor knight, come out of the queen's chamber, and then, of course, Mordred's musical voice, which is not booming like the other voices. Wit thou well, here are 14 armed, and thou canst not escape. So Lancelot does what he does in Mallory, which is that he yanks someone through the door, slams the door behind him, and White here gives us this wonderful fluid movement, like in the process of it would be done really well in film today. Here's one of those things that film could do, right? They do it with CGI and slow motion and everything. But he pulls the guy through the door, clubs him to death, slams the door, and has him on the floor, all in kind of like one fluid movement. And White anticipates modern cinematography when he describes how it happens. He put his shoulder against the leaping door and softly pushed the beam back into the wall. Then, still holding the door shut with his shoulder, the people on the other side had desisted from their hewing, feeling that something was about to happen. He settled his right foot firmly on the ground, about 2 feet from the door jamb, and let the door swing open. It stopped with a jerk at his foot, leaving a narrow opening so that it was more ajar than open, and a single knight in full armor blundered through the gap with the obedience of a puppet on strings. Lancelot slammed the door behind him, shot the bar, took the figure's sword by the pommel in his padded left hand, jerked him forward, tripped him up, bashed him on the head with the stool as he was falling, and was sitting on his chest in a trice, as limber as he had ever been. All was done with what seemed to be ease and leisure, as if it were the armed man who was powerless, the great turret of a fellow who had entered in the height and breadth of armor, and who had stood for a second looking for his adversary through the slit of his helmet. This man had given an impression of docility. He seemed to have come in, and to have handed his sword to Lancelot, and to have thrown himself upon the ground. Now the iron hulk lay as obediently as ever, while the bare-legged man pressed its own sword point through the ventail of the visor. It made a few protesting shudders as he pressed down with both hands on the pommel of the sword. This is at least resisting arrest, I think. Killing the people who've come to apprehend you in the commission of a crime. That's a significant aggravating factor.
Indeed.
But
it's interesting you brought up the point about cinematography. I mean, this is a very cinematic scene. And at the very beginning of this chapter, White brings that up himself when he says that Guinevere was not like a movie star.
No, I think that White has seen action films of his time, right? Errol Flynn and stuff, Captain's Courageous and so on and so forth. And although they weren't as maybe sophisticated isn't the right word, but they weren't as technologically advanced as our choreographed fight scenes are today. He certainly had an idea or an eye for what works on film, and he does a really good job here. And if you were a director, you would probably couldn't do any better than to just take this as written, right? It's really, really well done. But what I find particularly telling about it is the inversion, right? And White is focused on that as well. And this is completely unique to White. This isn't in any of the sources. That it's the powerful man who steps into the room who actually seems to be completely docile and harmless. He uses the words a puppet on strings, which I think is perfect, right? Mordred can predict what Arthur will do because it's written down in books of the law. But Lancelot has the same gift in combat, and it doesn't have to be written down. He knows what people are going to do. He's been in so many battles, and he knows. I mean, combat is written down in a way too, right? I mean, you all go through very similar training. There are certain responses to certain situations and certain attacks and certain thrusts and certain parries. There's particular responses that you're supposed to do. And Lancelot has internalized them to such a degree that he simply knows what will happen. So, I mean, it looks like incredible foresight in a way, like he can predict the future. And I suppose in a way he can, because he knows exactly what will happen. He's trained these knights himself. I'll open the door. They'll come through neat and orderly. They'll look around for me. But by the time, because I know they're going to waste time doing that, it'll be too late by the time that happens. You know?
Well, there's something about their bodies, too, that's significant to White, and he keeps drawing attention to it. I mean, he makes a point of saying that Lancelot has maintained his body well, that even at 60, he still stands upright. He's not hunched at all. And that he doesn't drink very much, which means, he's not ingested things that will prematurely age him. Whereas Agravain is the opposite. He has prematurely aged himself. He looks older than his years. He drinks to excess. And so his body is just not what Lancelot's is. And we also get a lot of talk about Mordred's body. He's weak. He's always been weak. He's just physically not impressive in the way that a lot of knights are.
He's hunchbacked, like Richard III. Despite
their armor, they're not going to be able to compete with Lancelot's just sheer athleticism.
Well, they've got 10 knights with them, don't forget. So,
well, there's that.
But Lancelot is, of course, going to level the playing field by only fighting them one at a time in this initial battle. I mean, as level as the playing field can be if one man is completely unarmed and the other is in plate armor with a sword. But as we see, it isn't actually that unequal because Lancelot knows what he's going to do. And he's not going to be surprised, therefore, right? Lancelot knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows what his adversary is doing. He knows what's going to happen when he opens the door. And his adversary has no idea what's on the other side of the door. His adversary doesn't know if Lancelot is armed. His adversary doesn't know if Lancelot has armor. His adversary doesn't know where Lancelot is. He doesn't know what's in the room. He doesn't know where the queen is. And so this element of surprise is so powerful. It actually, as White says, or kind of alludes to, it actually puts the balance entirely in Lancelot's favor because he knows exactly what is going to happen. And that basically allows him to set himself up to defeat this person. He's got a wooden stool in one hand that he can use as a club, and he knows he's going to trip this guy as he comes in. And as he's falling, he's going to hit him in the head with the stool. And it's not a complicated plan, and it's a very effective one. And once you've got one dead knight, then you've got his armor and his sword, and now you are armed and you have a sword. And of course,
and it's one for which the armor doesn't help much because once someone in that heavy armor falls down, it's hard to get up.
Very difficult to get up. And that's why once he's on the floor and Lancelot has a sword, he can just sit on top of him and basically push his sword through his head. And that's the end of whoever that was.
There's one other interesting detail here that White does frequently throughout this last novel is he said Lancelot answered them in the language of honor, and then he switches into Malorian dialect. So this is a way for him to work in Mallory's way of saying things, or something reminiscent of that, and have it make sense. There's just two different registers that the court uses.
We've seen Gawain use it too. And we also see Mordred use it. We've already seen him use it. And in fact, he's going to use it at the end of the chapter as well. Well, it transpires that the knight who has fallen on the floor, the first one through the door, was Agravain. So that's the end of him. One of the unhappy knights has finally met his end. And Lancelot isn't dead this time. But outside, Mordred is yelling, "Fie on thee, traitor! We will have thee maugre thy head and slay thee if we list." Another voice shouted, "Let thee wit, we have the choice of King Arthur to save thee or to slay thee." And then he steps out, "Ah, sirs," this is Lancelot, he said with a grimness, "is there none other grace with you? Then keep yourselves." And they're all going to be dead very shortly.
There is something unfortunate about what Lancelot has done.
Oh, yes.
Because they would not have caught them in the act, which was the whole point of this, because they weren't in the midst of having sex. They weren't in bed together. They weren't naked together. So they would not have caught them, in which case the trial would not have, had anything to reveal. But Lancelot has killed Agravain, which creates a whole different reason for prosecution.
Right? And it speaks to his motivations. Like, why would you kill him if you were doing nothing
wrong?
Nothing wrong, exactly, if you were totally innocent. And so this whole thing, this whole episode is just fraught with could-haves and should-haves, right? It's
tragedy.
Well, that's it, yes. At any point, it could have been averted if the people involved had just done something a little differently. And that's what makes it so tragic to us, is like we want to yell at Lancelot with Gareth, "Don't go." So we have a narrative character who fills our role for us and goes to Lancelot. What if we could tell Lancelot not to go? Okay, well, we'll have a character do that then. And a character goes and tells Lancelot not to go, and Lancelot does what Lancelot would have done if we had gone to him. And he puts his hand in our back and says, now, out you go. I've dealt with this before. There's nothing to worry about. Go on. Well, then what if they hadn't done anything? Well, Lancelot foils that too, because he has to get out of the room. He's being threatened. He feels his life is in danger, and he kills the first man through the door in order to get his armor and his sword. So you run into these, switchbacks in the path. And every time you think that there might be a way out of it, it actually propels you inexorably towards the fall of Camelot. Well, Chapter 8 sets us up for yet another Lancelotian disaster. Gawain is there. One of his brothers is dead. It's Agravain. He's not particularly happy with Agravain. He told Agravain not to go. They came on Lancelot armed. Lancelot was unarmed. And Gawain's feeling is, he kind of got what he deserved. I told him not to do it. And the king also did remember. The king told them, anyone who's ever challenged Lancelot on this point has ended up dead. So you better arm yourself. Look to yourselves. It kind of echoes what Lancelot yells at them when he charges out. Well, this is where the next failure is in that Hallmark series starring the late Sam Neill as Merlin. When stop. Show them if you ask again from your iPhone. Sorry, Siri has heard me say her name apparently. In that BBC series, when Lancelot rides away with Guinevere in the scene that immediately follows this one in the book, Merlin says, and that was the end of Lancelot. But my memory of Lancelot was that he was someone who never got anything quite right. And in the end of this book, we might start to feel that way as well. Maybe this is why he gets the name the ill-made knight. It's not really about his appearance. It's because he doesn't get anything quite right. His devotion to God, he doesn't get that quite right. Right? He can't get to the Grail because it's not quite correct. And then he comes back and he defiles it again with his adultery. In the episode with Guinevere, Agravain, and Mordred, there were all sorts of ways for him to get out of this. He could not have gone. He could not have killed Agravain. And he doesn't get that quite right either. And now, in the scene that is about to follow, where Arthur is trying to convince, not very enthusiastically, but he's doing what he must be seen to do, to convince his knights to help him, defend Guinevere while she's being burned at the stake, so that Lancelot can't come and rescue her. Gareth and Gaheris are convinced to go, but they will not be armed. Gawain won't even go. He refuses to be involved. And the king says, what if I order you? And Gawain says, I won't obey. That's treason, But Arthur's got his hands full, so he's not going to be charging Gawain with treason at the moment. Well, this is also going to set up Lancelot not getting it quite right, because, of course, Gareth and Gaheris do go because they love Arthur and believe in his idea about the law, which Gawain doesn't. And that proves fatal. And I wonder where to make of this. I mean, this is from Mallory. It's from the sources, right? But what does it suggest to us? The only reason Gareth and Gaheris go is because Arthur asks them to, and because they are more faithful than Gawain. And they try to thread the needle. They try to be faithful to Arthur and also faithful to Lancelot. They're not going to arm themselves against him. But they will go because Arthur has asked them to. And this gets them killed. They're punished for this, you could say, right? Why? What is if there's a lesson to draw from this, what is the lesson?
That's a good question. I mean, it's when Lancelot is put into a situation where he feels like fighting is the only answer, then he's going to fight to win. And that's sort of where he feels pressed now, that he's in fight or flight mode. So even though they're unarmed, he's sort of merciless with them because he feels trapped. But this is a good example of Lancelot just not ever fully assessing a situation correctly. His solution didn't need to be force. He didn't need to fight for his life in this particular instance, but he thinks he does. And so he does.
The other thing that is going on, and this is White, is that he has Gawain with Arthur watching from their window up above. And they see Lancelot come in and they're overjoyed, right? Yes, I knew he'd come. Here he is, right? At first, Arthur's afraid he won't come, and Gawain's like, oh, he'll be here. You just wait, wait till the moment. He'll wait until the moment. And that's exactly what happens, right? The fiery brand is brought forth and they're going to burn the queen. And then Lancelot charges in and then they're commenting on it like sportscasters. Oh, look, who's that? Oh, he's under his horse, right? We have this wonderful back and forth. He takes off. He's brought a kirtle and a gown for the queen, dresses her. My Lancelot would not let my Guinevere be seen in her shift. He would nae. He's putting them on her. She is smiling. Bless them both, the creature. But oh, the foot people. It is finished, ye might say. He won't do more execution than he need. We can trust him for that. We can trust the man for that. Is that Damis under the horse? Aye, Damis had ever a red panish. I think they are for drawing off. How quick they have been. So they're watching it and they're sort of kind of cheering it on, commenting on the events. And Arthur's like, well, he's not going to hurt any more people than he has to, will he? Gawain says, no, he won't hurt more people than he has to. Don't worry, King. And they're both in it together. And then, of course, we find out what has actually transpired as they're on their way out. Modred comes in, and there's a terrible scene where Gawain says, where is Sir Gareth? Where did you leave him, Mordred? And Mordred says, oh, if you want to go find him, go look for him down in the plaza, among the people on the square. Arthur began, Gareth and Gaheris are lying in the marketplace. It was difficult to recognize them because of the blood. Well, there's a certain delight on Mordred's part, right?
Well, Gawain has just terribly insulted him in the scene before when Mordred says, well, I'm ready to go out there. And Gawain says, you can. Arthur's told Lancelot not to hurt you.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Exactly. That's why you're not dead. And this makes him hate his father even more. Right? It makes him even more furious. I think there's something right in that Pendragon Games assessment that Mordred has a passion of hatred for himself. Like all the forces around him kind of insulate him and protect him. And so he never has to protect himself. And yet he's always, it emasculates him really, right? I mean, doesn't it? It makes him, there's a sort of impotence to him. That must be.
Oh, he's very emasculated in this chapter. I mean, when Arthur comes in, he's bawling like a child.
Yeah.
And then they basically point out, his grievance, Mordred's grievance is no one thinks that he's brave. No one thinks that he went with Agravain to fight. No one thinks that he's strong. He doesn't live up to the values of the Orkney clan of, strength of arms and, masculinity and all of that. And so he hates himself for not living up to those values, and then does the Nietzschean thing of making a virtue of his vices and a vice of the virtues.
Yes, and so one way we can see this is that when he's unable to defeat Lancelot, and he comes back and says, "Look, I've got a broken arm. I fought him," and they say, "Well, why are you the only one who escaped alive?" Well, it transpires that, the king had said, please don't kill my son. And so the fact that he's protected is not a source of joy to him. It makes it worse in a way because he couldn't even stop Lancelot, even though Lancelot had been told not to hurt him. Like he's immune and he still couldn't stop him. Right? He can't, he's been told not to be injured and still he can't stop Lancelot. And the sense you get is like those old cartoons or those old TV shows, where there's this one really big guy on the football team. He's got his hand on somebody's head, and they're just swinging their arms, and you can't touch him. And that's what you've got between Lancelot and Modred, right? Lancelot just can't be touched by Modred. He doesn't have enough power. He's insufficiently powerful. And all of these ways of protecting him only serve to reinforce that and heighten it and make it worse. And so, of course, he hates the source of those things, which is his father, and he hates the source of that which is himself, right? His father is doing these things because of who Mordred is. There's that one telling scene where Mordred says, I wish I had never been born. And Arthur says, I wish that too. But you have been born. And so we have to do the best we can now. That's a remarkable moment.
Well, it's not as if Arthur has handled things the best way possible with regards to Mordred. I mean, as Mordred himself points out, what about the babies on the ship?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And there are things about Arthur that just don't make sense for me. Without just saying that he's trapped in his own arbitrary creation, and once he's set the parameters of it, he can't break out of it. He's trapped himself within it.
But he
Because,
won't break out of it. He absolutely could, but he won't.
Because
which
it would violate.
makes it so difficult to understand his psychology here. Like, there are all sorts of options for what could be done here, that wouldn't break the system that you invented yourself. Like, you can commute a sentence of execution. You could send her off to a nunnery. Like, there are things within that kind of a legal framework that would do. And if your whole point is just that, well, if I'm seen to show any kind of mercy for her, then maybe the whole system will break. But then he also won't, behind the scenes where nobody can see, be the person who provides for her escape. Well, if it's just a matter of appearances, then by all means, manage the escape secretly. You still maintain the appearance of your system if that's what you're afraid of breaking. Like, there's all sorts of options that just, they don't occur to him because he's trapped within this thing that he made himself.
Well, of course, we have this terrible scene where Gawain learns of the death of Gareth and Gaheris and 20 other knights, including Sir Belliance, Sir Sigwarides, Sir Griflet, Sir Brandiles, Sir Aglavale, Sir Tor, Sir Gauter, Sir Gillimer, Sir Reynolds' 3 brothers, Sir Damas, Sir Primus, Sir Kay the Stranger, Sir Driant, Sir Lambegus, Sir Hermund, and Sir Pertolope. And of course, Gawain, who has been absolutely mountainous in this book and in the books preceding it, a man who seems to be incapable of weakness at any moment, right? Always kind of bluff, punch in the ribs kind of guy. Blubbering and still running, the red mountainous man was in the room once more. He was running to Arthur like a child. He was sobbing, "It is true, it is true. I found a man what saw it done. Poor Gaheris and our wee brother Gareth. He has killed them both unarmed." He fell on his knees. He buried his sand-white head in the old king's mantle. There's something about the Orkney. I mean, we can even call them at this point the Orkney boys. They're not boys. These are grown men. Like, Gawain is probably like 50 or 60 years old. He's an old man himself. Not quite as old as Arthur, but nearly. And this, red mountainous man is reduced to sobbing, as White says also, literally, like a child. And we see this in all of the Orkney boys. They never really grow up, do they? They're all boys to the end.
Well, that's part of White's vision of them. They're not capable of intellectual development past a certain point. I mean, he sees them as kind of stuck.
Which is strange because Gawain earlier in the chapter refuses to go down and fight. He says, I love the queen and I'm not going to stand between her and her rescue. Like he outright refuses to go to that. It's a remarkably insightful moment by Gawain.
Well, that's the way the Orkney way is, right? It's about personal loyalties. Blood feuds, blood loyalties, personal grievances. I mean, that's what leads to this whole thing, is that Agravain has a personal grievance against Lancelot. So the big systemic thing that Arthur is trying to create, where you subordinate your personal desires to, I don't know, the law or to a higher calling, none of that matters.
Abstractions matter more than people in Arthur's system.
And I think that's it exactly, Drew, is that Arthur's created a kind of bloodless Camelot. And the problem with that is that you can't actually escape from passion. You can try to create this big system of abstractions that will accommodate every eventuality, but passions will break out of the system. And if they're powerful enough, they'll break the system, and that's what's going to happen here.
And what is the purpose of a system of justice if you forget the people?
Right.
If you create a bloodless and robotic system and it's not serving the interest of the people, why have it in the first place?
Well, that's the
Law
thing.
is for the people, not the people for the law.
Well, that's the thing, and I think here to play devil's advocate on the part for the benefit of King Arthur. Remember that he's trying to replace something that he deems worse, right? Which is the rule of might. And so he says, well, might is unacceptable. Might leads to that litany of evils that White charts for us, which are historical, like genuinely historical evils, about the awful things that are done to people. And White says, Arthur looked on this and thought, well, we have to have something else, because even redirecting might leads to this. So we can't have might at all. We have to move beyond might. We can't just dig a trench for might and channel it. We need to be done with might as an organizing principle. Let's do right instead.
Yes, but you see, he doesn't actually do away with might at all. He tries to subordinate it to an abstraction.
Exactly.
We're going to have might subordinated to this abstraction. I'll call it justice, and I'll set the parameters of it, and then everyone must submit. And I'll have to use force to get them to submit, but eventually everyone will submit, rather than actually doing away with people having that much might. I mean,
he ties a woman to a stake to burn her. Right. How is that not might?
Well, and we don't do anything about the material reality of might. Like, we still have, people who live in castles and peasants who are attached to the land. We still have people who have vastly more than they need, and then people who basically just scrape by on what they can get. Like, so the might hasn't been done away with. He just seems to think that you could get it to be subordinated to an abstraction, and that proves not to work.
Well, indeed not. And this, of course, is what Arthur has to think about, and indeed what White has to think about as Arthur nears the end of his reign. Like, why didn't that work? Well, it doesn't work because you really haven't dealt with the problem, which is that you can't get rid of might. And you can't simply subordinate it.
You might be able to get rid of might. You might be able to get rid of extreme inequality, but you can't do what he did, which is keep might, but make it subordinate to an abstract set of principles. Because the material reality of having much more and wanting to keep what you have incentivizes the mighty to use their might to sustain their might. So it's subordinating it to an abstraction is the misunderstanding. You might be able to do away with might, but you'd have to do it materially. You'd actually have to remove the inequality itself.
I mean, at the end of the day, I can always punch you in the head, and there will be people who are stronger than others. You can't do away with might in the end.
Well, this is one of White's things too, is that he acts as if the vast differential of might, right, the extreme inequality, is the same thing as, some people are stronger than others.
Oh, no, the one comes
yes,
out of the
there's going to be a degree of inequality that you
and the
can't
P,
get rid
I would
of.
say, right? That these little inequalities, the inequality of the individual, are magnified by any sort of society. Once you have people together, those differences are magnified. I don't think there's any way of getting around that in the end, short of depriving people of their liberties and their freedoms completely and absolutely, and keeping.
Well, you could insist on the collective ownership of the means of production.
I don't think even that works. As we've seen, there's plenty of might in communist societies, and most of it's turned against its people. I suspect that what you end up with is the only way you get rid of might is by locking everyone in a cell. But then you haven't got rid of might at all. You've just distributed it against everyone, right?
But distribution is what you want. I mean, you want to eliminate as much of the material inequality as possible, because the more of it that there is, the more incentive there is to use it to your advantage and against other people.
You
This
you
he's
have this.
he
You
never does
believe that
anything.
people behave rationally. I don't.
No, I don't think that people. I think that people respond to the incentives that they're given.
That's rational.
Well, it's not always logical though. I mean, they're responding to incentives, but there could be incentives that actually harm them in the long run. Like
Well,
these are
in the
people
case of
making
Mordred,
rational.
right? These are. He probably thinks these are helpful policies. I don't think that Mordred has actually thought through this, and he's a revolutionary. Let's not forget, right? He seems to think that he's going to usher in a new age with his thrashers, as we'll find out next week. But the age he creates is not an age that is conducive to Mordred, which is interesting. Like, if we look really carefully at his motivations, what is Mordred trying to achieve? Does he just want to destroy his father? Will that make Mordred happy?
He wants to destroy himself.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, if let's just speculate for a moment. If Mordred actually succeeded, if he killed, if his father dies, I don't know, of grief or something as a result of all this, is Mordred happy? I mean,
No.
So what's his goal? Right, and it's some sort of
I
weird.
don't know that Mordred even knows what his goal is. Mordred is unhappy, and we see this in the law a lot. People like something ought to be done, and so they do something, never realizing that doing nothing was an option and maybe the better option. And so as long as you have that psychological impetus in you, like something is wrong, something must be done, you will do any something, even if it's the wrong something.
Well, that's
there are also things that those who have been afraid of Mordred up till this point, who might have been in a position, I'm thinking of Arthur in particular, to defang him, to prevent him from causing more trouble, I think also have some responsibility here. I mean, Arthur has acted as if there was nothing he could ever do, that Mordred was just eventually going to be a problem and there was nothing to be done about it. And he saw him getting worse and worse. He saw the patterns of behavior. And yet Arthur is in a position to do something about it, but just won't. He's one of the most trapped characters, but the trap is his own trap. He made it for himself.
But it's all perfectly understandable, right? Like, he's decided that he needs to treat. Think about it. It's kind of like when Arthur was dealing with Kay way back in The Sword and the Stone. He understands why Mordred is the way he is. And he also understands that, like, by, I don't know, punishing him or something, that would in a way make it worse, right? It would prove the truth of what Mordred falsely believes. Right? This sort of,
well, let it be proved. Let it be proved, as long as you make him harmless.
What of justice? Isn't that the whole point? It would be
the abstraction
to treat him that way.
Yeah, the abstraction of justice. I'm with Drew on this one. It's not real justice. It's just the nice abstraction you can put on it so that you might get the broadest possible agreement. Well, this is justice.
But I mean, surely if Mordred hasn't done anything wrong, it would be unjust to lock him up if you thought he might eventually be a threat to the realm. I mean, you can't lock people up for what you think they might do. At some point,
no, I don't think that. I think
you say that, but
well, I mean, I think there are things that can be done about Mordred short of locking him up that would make it so that he doesn't have, arms at his disposal.
I mean, the problem, exile him or something. Yes, I suppose.
Yeah, there are other options besides locking him up. On the grounds that he's exhibited a pattern of destructive behavior that's getting increasingly worse.
What's
and you're a responsible ruler.
Hate to be the defender of Mordred here. What's destructive? I mean, he's working within the law. He's following the letter of the law, right? Everything's...
Well, that's the problem. You keep going back to the abstraction. Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. That's the world that Arthur's created, is that world.
And that's Arthur's downfall. He's created legalism with no sort of safety valve or something like that to say if the law would compel mathematically or logically an absurd result, you don't have to follow it.
So you need,
Right.
what you're asking for, Lane, is a state of exception.
I'm asking for a set of second
Drew
order
is
rules
nodding.
that
Yes,
that
let's have
allow
a
you
state of
to
exception.
adjudicate, the contradictory cases that arise within a formal system.
After all, sovereign is
We
he
need
who decides
S5, not
the
S4.
exception, right,
S5,
Drew?
damn it.
Sovereign is he who decides the exception. So if Arthur is really sovereign, he should make an exception and get rid of Mordred.
It's sort of Schmittian. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a little bit. Well, in any case,
Another trap that Arthur has with regards to Mordred is that he believes that Mordred has to succeed him.
yeah. he
Like,
doesn't have
why?
any other
Why does
children.
Mordred have to succeed you? There's no necessary reason for that, except that you've insisted that that's the rules.
Well, those are the rules he's inherited, and he's decided.
But
to keep
Arthur's fine with changing rules. He's invented a whole damn system of bourgeois justice that is a few centuries ahead of its time, and he's trapped himself in it.
Maybe a few centuries ahead of its time. We're not entirely certain. All
Right, we don't know
well,
when we are.
Yeah, when we figure out where we are and when. Well, that's it for this week. Now, next week will be the conclusion of The Once and Future King. We should say that we end with the siege at Lancelot's castle, where he goes out to fight Gawain and bonks him on the head, and Gawain goes back to his tent and holds his head and says, "Oh," and they do it again the next day, over and over and over again. This is not good for Gawain, and it's depressing for Lancelot, because Lancelot doesn't want to fight him. And there's a certain sense in which Gawain doesn't want to fight Lancelot either. But everyone's caught up in forces beyond their control. Gawain loves Gareth and Gaheris. And he also loves his king, and he feels that Lancelot is in rebellion to him, and he has a duty to his family, and so he has to go out. I don't mean to say that he says out loud, "I don't want to do this." But you get the sense that his heart isn't entirely in it, right? And so he marches out there every day to get bonked on the head by Lancelot. In the sources, this isn't in White. In the sources, Lancelot grows stronger. Gawain grows stronger as he gets closer and closer to noon. But then he grows weaker as the sun gets closer and closer to setting. So he's at his peak, and he's pressing Lancelot most hotly when the sun is directly overhead. The sources don't give any reason for that, whether it's magical or just fate or something about the Orkneys or Gawain in particular. But I think that there is something interesting in that source, because it suggests there's something like natural and primal and not at all constructed or man-made about Gawain. That White could have done well by bringing that over, right? He's a primal force, that red mountainous man. All right, next week, the conclusion. Thank you for all of your comments. We look forward to wrapping this up with you in chapters, 11 to the close. Thank you this week to our co-hosts. They are Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
It's been a pleasure.
And Lane Haygood.
Goodbye as always.
We'll be back next week. Until then, from all of us here at Critical Readings, Godspeed.